Hello again everyone and welcome back to the Underground. This is the Intel Update for November 1st through the 8th, 2025. Well, we have arrived at another week that is quite illuminating for the state of affairs around the world, so let's get right to it with the global strategic concerns. Continuing the trend from the past couple of weeks around the world this week, there have not been that many new things occur, just a lot of inflamed tensions and a lot of continuing issues. The United Kingdom continues to burn down as before with regards to migration issues. The flavor this week, like I've highlighted a lot in The Wire, is the release of prisoners who are not supposed to be released. So things have been pretty hot in the UK because of that. Similarly, in Europe, something to be aware of is the Ukraine war is continuing as before. However, Russia has made a lot of gains this week, so Russia is in one of those phases again where they're trying to take a lot of terrain. They're trying to bite and hold a lot more territory so that they are in a better position to negotiate, as well as to make the situation look a lot more hopeless for Ukraine so that the United States and Western Europe decide to not supply Ukraine as much. That's probably never going to happen, but at the same time, that's kind of what's kicked off this week. Here on the home front this week, we've had many different elections for lower level offices throughout the country, most notably in Minnesota, Virginia, and New York, as well as a few others. And down in the Caribbean, everything is more or less the same as before, with strikes continuing throughout the week, and more forces continuing to move into the region. Now, when it comes to those forces down in the Caribbean, let's take a look at the strategic movement for this week, which is a big fat NSTR, or nothing significant to report. Take note that the Gerald Ford carrier strike group is still in the Med. There's a lot of speculation, not a whole lot of it is useful, but I did want to mention that the Ford is not yet in position to start carrying out strikes in Venezuela. One can argue whether or not she's going to be necessary for the operation, so again, in the intel world, intel people do intel things, and they tend to think about the deception tactics of all this kind of thing, so if I was running things, what I would do is I would park the Ford in the Med because you don't actually need the Ford. You can do everything that you need to do with regards to an invasion with the resources that are already on station and secretly, not so secretly, they provide press statements, but quietly deployed to Trinidad as well as Puerto Rico. It would be nice to have a carrier on station because that's going to provide a lot of capability that you're going to need very, very much. But Venezuela also knows we're coming, or at least that's what they think. Will they, won't they? I don't know. But Venezuela has done a lot to prepare their own territory for an amphibious invasions. So if the Marines and the sailors taking part in this war to be were to actually go ahead with this conflict, they're going to have to use deception. They're going to have to trick Venezuela somehow to make their operation a lot more successful in the opening few hours. One of those deception tactics might be making everybody think that the Ford is going to be necessary, and because the Ford's not there, the invasion won't occur, whereas the invasion might actually occur without the Ford altogether. I don't know, I'm just speculating, but I find it interesting that media blitzed from the Pentagon last week about how the Ford's going to be moving into the area to start striking stuff more deliberately, and she hasn't moved, so very interesting stuff. Now back here in the homeland itself, I'm going to kind of skip over kinetic events for this week because I need to update this slide, so don't think that nothing has happened, I just haven't put it on the slide yet. There have been a few things here and there. I need to go back and update my ArcGIS maps for this week. What I really wanted to focus on this week are the larger concerns and the storm that is a-brewing with regards to the recent election stuff in the United States. Now, if any of you are like me, you're probably quite burned out on the idea of politics and all the stuff that's been said about the recent elections in Virginia, Minneapolis, and in New York City. But today I'm going to talk about this stuff because I think it's very interesting that we understand what's going on. Some of you also might have been slightly confused as to why this week I have been focusing on the United Kingdom and a lot of the news that has been running through British society this week. Well, to reveal the spoiler, it's because the United Kingdom is facing a lot of issues that we are about to face here in the United States, particularly in New York City. Of course, we can cherry-pick data all we want to make our point for us. However, I did come across this very, very interesting data in New York City. This election was interesting because it shows the demographic shift and how quickly it can occur in arguably the largest or / most important city in the United States and maybe even in the world, right? So in the long term, that alone is going to be interesting, but what struck my eye is the sheer number of people that voted for Mamdani this election that did not live in New York City just 5 years ago. As we can see by these exit polls, 83% of everyone who voted for Mamdani has lived in New York City for less than 5 years. So we have the playbook, don't we? We've known this for many, many years. People like me have not been allowed to say it, even amongst conservative cohorts who've not been allowed to acknowledge this reality for a long time without being shouted down in some way. But now, the data is clear, isn't it? Importing voters is what's happening, and it works, as we can see in New York City. Mamdani is the candidate that is preferred by the migrant population of New York City, which now is the majority. I've seen conflicting data on this, so I'm not sure if this statistic is exactly accurate, but if you want a neat bit of population density table data to bring out at parties to be a damper on the evening, 52% of all New Yorkers do not speak English in their own home. In terms of elections, it seems, it is also very much a harbinger of things to come, such as the case in Virginia. Now, again, Virginia politics is utter insanity, and I feel like it reduces my life expectancy every time I have to be aware of what goes on in Virginia, so just take that with a grain of salt. But there's been a lot of rhetoric, especially amongst conservative groups, about the election of Jay Jones, who won the attorney generalship in Virginia, because during his campaign, Jones was faced with answering for a lot of the text messages that he sent to someone else in which he called for the murder, very gruesome, very brutal murder of his political enemies, including their children. So these are the text messages that this man sent, and he is now the chief law enforcement officer for the state of Virginia. He now runs the law in Virginia. He is responsible for prosecuting crimes for the state. He is the ultimate representative of law and order in Virginia, and he has openly called for the murder of his political enemies. Now, a lot of Republicans in Virginia do the classic Virginia Republican thing where they just have that cycle where they're outraged about something, then they don't do anything, then they're outraged about something, then they don't do anything, then they're outraged about something, then they don't do anything, and the cycle continues, right? Classic Virginia, classic southern United States, actually. But anyway, what's interesting is that the rhetoric, the narrative that's going around with a lot of conservative think tanks, a lot of political action committees, a lot of conservative kind of ecosphere things, is that Jay Jones won despite these comments, right? That he won. This was a hurtful moment for him, that his election was tainted by this, but still Democrats are loyal voters, so they were able to get him across the line to win. Ladies and gentlemen, that line of thinking is what we in the business call a mistake. He did not win in spite of these comments. He won because of these comments. Causation versus correlation, right? Like the Reddit people scream at me all the time. This is not a correlation. This is causation. He advocated for the murder of his political enemies, and that's what got him across the line, because the people actually support this. It's a hard mentality to get into. I understand. I really do. I have a lot of sympathy for the normies out there. It's not easy to be a normie nowadays, but we've got to acknowledge where we're at, and the Virginia election kind of proved that, right? This election, and all elections now, are down to just a handful of issues, and they're not political ideas. They are, amongst the political left, the main voting issue is which candidate is going to get me closer to killing my political enemies, right? And amongst the political right, the main voting issue is who's going to keep the NFL on my television, right? So for those who really don't like politics like myself, it doesn't really matter at this point, because now we're starting to see politics enter into the realm of counterterrorism, which again is where I prefer to keep my thoughts these days. I personally try to focus on things like risk, but look, man, if we've got elected officials openly calling for the murder of their enemies, and now they're in charge of a lot of people that have guns and can use their monopoly on violence to actually do what they want, I kind of have to comment on politics, and unfortunately, that's just the way that it is, right? I would really rather not, but this last election proved a lot, and unfortunately, not a whole lot of it's good stuff. It's unfortunate, but that's the way that it is in some parts of the United States, such as Minneapolis. Now, the Minneapolis election was quite interesting this week because everybody expected Omar Fateh to win, but he did not. He actually lost by a long shot. Why is this? Why did he lose? Well, it turns out, if you read a lot of the Somali Times and the Somalian news from Somalia, you will be rather disturbed to find out that he lost due to tribal issues. Omar Fateh is from the Darood clan, which is a different clan than many people in Minneapolis. So there are now enough Somalians in Minneapolis to where there are now intertribal conflicts breaking out between different tribes of Somalians in Minneapolis. And that's exactly what happened during the election. So Ilhan Omar supported Omar Fateh during the election, and she is also from the Darood clan. Her ex-husband is actually from the Hawiye clan. So they're from two different clans. Her ex-husband rallied behind Jacob Fry. So this election was purely a proxy war in Minneapolis between the Darood clan and between the Hawiye clan. So that is the current state of affairs in Minneapolis, and that is why he did not win his election. He will probably be able to make a political comeback. Again, he is still in the Senate. He's still a senator, right? So yeah, interesting stuff, isn't it? Now, moving on to a national issue, I wanted to briefly cover this out of order. We have to talk about this, the SNAP situation. So right now, it's still very much tied up in court. Some people have gone on social media and bragged about getting their EBT payments for this month, the month of November. Others have stated they haven't gotten anything. Other people have stated that they've gotten partial funds. So, again, for those of you who don't know how it works, the SNAP program is administered by the states, but it gets funded by the feds. So the states fund what they can, which in many cases is just a drop in the bucket, and the feds come in and they're able to pay the rest. Different states have had different lawsuits suing the federal government for their SNAP funding, but again, this is the government shutdown. Judges can pencil whip things all they want to, but the judiciary cannot order the executive branch to do something that Congress is supposed to do. This is squarely on Congress. There have been a lot of legal challenges. There have been a lot of things at the state level, which is probably why I think a lot of people are getting their SNAP benefits. So some states do have a reserve. A lot of states are trying to pull funding from other programs. So personally, I'm quite concerned about two things. One, the follow-on effects from shutting off a substantial portion of the country from a resource that they have grown used to getting for such a long period of time. That's a big concern. And the other concern, which is obviously more of a concern, is the people who actually need help. It is 2025, and it is no longer easy to find the people who genuinely need help and to connect people who genuinely need help with help. Unfortunately, any government-run program is going to have a broad brush approach to everything, fling as much aid out to everybody else, and even if 90% of the people who get the aid don't need the aid, maybe you will have helped 10%. That's the government's approach to programs like this, and there's arguments about it all the time. What I'm concerned about with is churches. Churches, charities, other groups which are going to have to take up the slack, and in case nobody's noticed, they're not ready. They're not ready for this. A lot of these charities, unfortunately, have become very political agencies, right? They will deny aid to some people, but not others. You know, a lot of times it's just a hard thing to do. So we're going to do the best we can and keep an eye on it, and we'll get things straightened out. Don't worry about that. Now, another contentious topic, which has really become a huge problem, is something that I mentioned in North Carolina in the Wire a few days ago. That is the construction of a golden Hindu idol, which is going to be roughly the same size as the Statue of Liberty in Moncure, North Carolina. You know, I've had a little bit too much coffee this morning, so ladies and gentlemen, I'm just going to speak my mind for a moment and plug ears if you don't like it. But I find it very, very interesting that the number one way, it would seem, to get Christians on the internet to shout at you is to condemn the construction of a literal golden idol in the heartland of the Bible Belt. Quite interesting. Quite interesting indeed. In case you're wondering about my own personal bias on this, no, I do not support the construction of a golden idol to a literal demon in my home. And before the screeching commences, I don't care. The idolatry and the demon worship will stop. It will stop if I have anything to say about it. Now, what to do about this sort of thing, I don't know, but maybe we can make it just as hard for them to build their pagan temple as it is to build a Christian church anywhere in the United States, because just in case you didn't know, whenever any other religious site other than Christianity wants to get built in any area, they pencil whip everything. It's like, would you like a chocolate mint on your pillow kind of experience, right? But if you want to do anything to do with the Lord Jesus Christ anywhere in this nation, every single possible conceivable barrier will come out. Every permit you need to get. Every authority needs to be involved. Every bit of red tape comes out when it comes to do with Christianity. And unfortunately, a lot of that red tape comes out in supposedly Christian areas. Just down the street from where this temple is supposed to be created. Right now it's just bare land. They're trying to get the money up for it. But right down the street from this, the state seized with eminent domain an old Baptist church and destroyed it. It was destroyed so they can make room for a factory. And guess what? In classic North Carolina fashion, the factory will not be built, because that's what North Carolina is famous for those of you who don't know. They plan to build these factories, these big manufacturing places. There's a few battery manufacturers around the United States where they buy up the land, they declare eminent domain, and then it becomes apparent in a few years they never actually intended to come here. They never actually intended to bring jobs to the area. They never actually intended to build the facility. It was all just a facade. It was all just a fake money laundering operation. So that's exactly what happened. But again, all of the grace is given to our enemies, and we give none to our friends. But that's just the way things are these days. It's alright, we'll get through it. But this week has been very, very illuminating, especially when it comes to what's going on in the UK, what's been transposed into New York City, and now what is starting to happen around the United States at breakneck pace. I don't really like to buy into the whole us versus them kind of dichotomy when it comes to a lot of issues. It's not necessarily red versus blue in a lot of cases. Sometimes it is, like in the political realm it is. But in some parts of the United States, we quite literally have to understand and start thinking about how we're going to circle the wagons on some issues. So all in all, it'll be okay. We'll get through this. But this is the challenge that we have been presented with. We are going to have to choose where our allegiances lie. For many people, that's an easy choice to make, but here's the thing. Just because it's an easy choice to make does not mean that it's easy to live with. Unfortunately, a lot of people are having to do that right now. They're having to make choices that they have to make because it's not really a choice, right? But it's still hard to live with, and a lot of people do not understand. Speaking personally for a moment, there will be consequences for me for coming out and saying that I personally don't support the creation of a Hindu golden idol in my homeland. Even though it's legal, a magic piece of paper says they have the right to do it in Washington, D.C., and it's on private property. Guess what? I still don't agree with it. I don't know what to do about it, and guess what? I haven't thought about it too much either. I do not need to consult 1,000 pages of Reddit or Wikipedia to know that in my heart this is something that I do not want in my home. And because this thought doesn't exactly line with what people think the founder's intent was, I'm going to catch a lot of flack for it, as I already have. But you know what? Everybody has a line, and that's mine. So we'll see how this works out. I'll keep following this story and see how it develops for the 4 people who probably agree with me on this. We'll see how it works out. We'll get through it okay. It'll be alright in the end. But right now, guys, I'm just tired. So anyway, rant done. Let's move into the Intercepted GhostNet Reports for this week. It was actually quite good. I was expecting it to be rather terrible due to the solar weather conditions, but there were a lot of people out there. A lot of people sharing information, checking in, conducting heartbeat tests, all that kind of stuff. So it's a thriving network. It does work. It is working. It's not the best. I know, I say the same thing every week, but it's true. Don't think that the GhostNet will remain just the way that it is forever. It will probably change over time. I don't foresee the JS8 call component changing, right, the main part of it, but the line of sight stuff may change, the Mesh-tastic stuff may change. We may implement some Halo stuff, some Reticulum here and there, all kinds of good stuff. Some of the other stuff like, I know the Tech Prepper is also working on his kind of proprietary communications infrastructure, which just looks like a very fascinating project by itself, so that's pretty cool stuff. All of that means that there are just a lot of cool things being done in the world of radio, but they're not being done just because they're cool. They're being done because they fulfill a need. They are a tool for a task, and that is some really good stuff to see. So, radio and communications in general are just one tool in the toolbox for moving ahead and doing what we can to move forward through these really challenging times, but we have to focus on the things we can change and the things that we can impact, and personal readiness is one of those. For all of the tyranny going on around the world, both in the United States and overseas with our friends across the pond in the UK, guess what? The things that matter in life, they can't take from you. And I think that's pretty important to remember sometimes. So, we'll keep doing that. We'll do the best that we can. We'll try to put aside our petty differences as best we can, but those differences that are very core values to us, I wouldn't expect anybody to compromise on. So we'll definitely make it, as cliche as it sounds, in the United States, amongst the heartland Americans. There is certainly more that unites us than divides us. So we'll try to focus on that and do the best that we can. So definitely keep your head on a swivel, do good wherever you can, help people out who need it, and I'll see you next time. And as always, fight in the shade.